Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January the 20th meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for the City of Franklin. We will begin with a call to order, and we'll do that with a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
I'm here.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Here.
And Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Here.
And the chair is here, so we're all present. Second item on the agenda is consideration of approval of minutes of the December the 2nd, 2021 Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Hope everyone's had a chance to look at those. Any corrections, deletions to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
Proper motion for a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. The next item on the agenda is 2 and 3 are similar. I'm gonna let Christine address both of those at the same time. We will need a separate motion and approval for each item, but we'll take those together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have been, and I want to give it a little bit of background for our newest committee members of the Budget and Finance Committee. We have been in a process, probably it's at least been for a year. Alderman Barnhill and Alderman Peterson have heard about this process longer than they would like. We needed additional services from our bank, which handles all of our investment transactions for us on our non-pension investments. And we recognized this, and we went through a process to be able to obtain those services. Fifth Third Bank has been our provider for this for a number of years, and we were not able to reach contract terms with Fifth Third between our law department and their attorneys. And we actually went to another bank that we had selected, and we had an issue because their bid was not a qualified bid. They actually, after they submitted, changed a key term, and we rejected that bid, went to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to reject that bid. And so what we decided to do after we stepped back, and it was important to be able to have more services for this aspect of our banking, and we already had a similar relationship with U.S. Bank for the assets related to our pension program. Now, of course, that relationship has changed somewhat over the years because, of course, the state of Tennessee and State Street Bank is the bank that we have the relationship for our state, the assets that are held by the state. But we do have a contract with U.S. Bank that has met all the requirements of the state of Tennessee, our law department, as well as the bank, and they do good work. So we then decided to go the route of working with them for probably a 1 to 2 year period of time, and then we'll go out again for proposals for this service. So we are in that transition phase. I believe the acknowledgement of the contract, the annual costs for this service are just under between $9,000 and $10,000 a year. That is within the purview of our city administrator, and we do report that to the board. But we will be doing a more extensive process here before too long. However, we have maturities in our non-pension investments pretty much every month, and so we need to have this service on board. So as part of this process of transitioning, we did need to update resolutions, the resolution with Fifth Third Bank, so that we can take steps as staff to make that transition occur seamlessly with U.S. Bank, and then also place a similar resolution in place with U.S. Bank. And that does identify we have 3 people, 3 positions that are authorized as our signers for our bank accounts. However, we do need to always have the incumbent persons and their legal names correct on these resolutions, and that is our mayor, our city administrator, and then our chief financial officer, the position I'm in. I did get married a couple of years ago. We had not updated the resolution with my new legal name. My IDs have both of my names on there, but we needed to have it match up. So one change is updating my last name to Brock. And then we also have staff members who are identified as people who can receive information about our bank accounts. And Margaret Wilson, who is with us, has been added. And we may come back to you later this year because our person who has been handling that aspect in our team retired at the end of the year, and her successor will not arrive until this summer. So Margaret is helping us, but we need to have all of these names and authorizations in place. So there's a little bit more information for the benefit of this committee, but we do ask for your consideration to advance this to the full board that will help us be able to effect this transition.
Any questions of Christine? So item 2 is ending the custody service for Fifth Third Bank, and item 3 then is accepting or entering into the custody services with U.S. Bank.
Well, they're actually very similar resolutions, but we need these in place so that these persons, primarily, it lets me sign documents as my current legal name, as well as allows Margaret Wilson to help receive information for this transition. So we do have to have a separate resolution in place
Right.
with the name of each bank. Thank you.
So we'll need to make two
Two motions.
separate motions.
A motion for item 2.
Motion to approve.
Proper motion to a second.
Second, sir.
And this would be to
And-
recommend approval.
Recommend approval.
Recommend approval to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen,
Yes.
yeah. Okay?
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. Let's go to item 3 then, which is a resolution also to enter into an agreement with U.S. Bank. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
And it stands to reason we're sending this to the full board. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So move. Second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Motion passes 4-0. Let's go to item 4, introduction to the City of Franklin budget process. Christine, do you want to lead that out? And then Michael Walters Young.
I believe Eric,
Eric?
is this one that you're taking the lead on?
I'll hand it off. I'm going to come back on the next item and talk a little bit about budget goals. But January does kick off our budget process for the budget that we approved go in place July 1, which is the start of our new fiscal year. So we are starting our FY23 budget process today. And one of the things we wanted to do, since half of you are new to this and some of your other colleagues on the board are new to this, to take you through a little bit of an overview of the process, what we expect from our staff, what we ask you to do as we work through this, and our goals in terms of reaching what is, we hope, a really effective, transparent, and helpful budget process that really fits with achieving community goals, your goals in the community overall. And we'll start it off. I don't know if Christine or Michael, who wants to take the reins from here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Walters Young, your Budget and Strategic Innovation Manager. And it's not quite Christmas and it's not quite purchasing month, but it is still the most wonderful time of the year because it is budget season. We're going to take a few minutes and walk you through an outline just to give you an exposure or a refresher, as the case may be, in terms of how we do budgeting here in the city of Franklin. We're going to talk about some of the basics of budgeting. We're going to talk about our focus of Franklin's management overall. That slide's going to be familiar to certainly two of you. It's been used for multiple years, but it really talks about sort of the three pedestals, if you will, that the management stool of Franklin rests upon. The overall timeline of what the next 4 to 5 months are going to look like for all of you. And as Eric mentioned, our responsibilities as well as your responsibilities. And then we'll kind of close it out and transition into the next item where we talk about budget goals. So I've done this a few years now, and I like to start at the very beginning because it's such a wonderful place to start. And that is to simply ask one question, and that is, what is a budget? Now, a budget is composed of many, many things. Most people, when they take a look at a budget, the first thing they think of are simply, well, it's numbers. Well, it's a lot more than that, because those numbers mean something. And it's more than measures, and it's more than words, and it's more than pretty pictures and graphs and charts. A budget, in its simplest form, is the reflection of the values of any organization. In this case, it's the reflection of the values of the city of Franklin and of the community. Because where you get your money from and where you choose to spend it reflects who you are, and it reflects what you stand for. It is the most important single policy decision and document that you will vote on and that you will build every year as you sit in those chairs, because it affects literally your entire operations. An organization that many of us are a part of, the Government Finance Officers Association of North America, defines that a budget should have 4 cardinal characteristics. It should be a policy document. It should be a financial plan. It should be an operations guide, and it should serve as a communications device. Good budgets do all 4. That's something that we try to do every year, and quite honestly, every day in our financial management of the community. The city of Franklin, for a long time now, has focused in 3 key areas, and we believe that these are sort of our to borrow a church term, marks of mission, if you will, but strong management, development of our community, and a strong financial base. I'm not going to go through all of the bullet points that are listed underneath, but understand that we believe in data-driven decision-making. We try to provide you with all the information you could ever ask for and want, but do it in a way that is accessible to all. You have already figured out in your limited tenure, like Mr. Barnhill, limited tenure on the board, that there's a lot of information. And in fact, the great last untapped resource of government in general is the data that we hold. How it's presented to you and your accessibility to it and your ability to digest it can greatly influence your ability to make informed decisions. You serve, or you have recently run to serve, on the strength of our community. You know who we are. We are a desired location. We have high development standards. We have a very educated workforce. And one of Eric's favorite phrases in this degree, we play offense. We want to make sure that we are on the cutting edge, and we want to make sure that we are aware of best practices. And then where most of us fit in this committee in our interactions with you is we make sure to protect, preserve, defend, and enhance a strong financial base for the city of Franklin. Your annual budget process reinvigorates that and reasserts that every year because we have high quality services. And case in point, you fund a ISO 1 level fire department. There are only 24-ish of those nationally. That saves money for Franklin citizens and their insurance rates. That's a direct demonstration of the ability for government expenditure to go forward and actually make it easier for residents in daily costs in their lives. Generally, the timeline, although budget season never ends, you are involved with it principally January through June, and this committee is involved January through May. But we begin working as early as October internally, developing workbooks, developing new systems and focuses for the year. In December of this year, we introduced the budget to leadership team, and then during December, we distributed budget materials, and I'll explain what those are to you in a moment, to departments that they can start to fill out, and they are in the process of returning those internally to us in the Budget and Analytics Division of the Finance Department, where we then will collate them. We will distribute them to senior administration for review meetings, and then they will come in front of you. So February, March, and April of this year, you'll note you have even more meetings in your calendar. And that is because it takes time in order to have departments review, and I'll explain that in a second. We divide up departments, though. Public safety and some parts of public works are in February. We generally do development services in March, and then administration, support, and outside agencies. So that would be the Franklin Transit Authority, that would be the Cool Springs Conference Center, and then you give upwards of $500,000 a year to outside agencies, what we call appropriations to outside agencies. We will review those in April. We have a process that we run through the Budget and Analytics Division where we solicit applications for those funds. We process those and then submit them to you in your packets to review. In late April, once you have finished, and this year it will be Thursday, April 21st, Friday, April 22nd, we will sit down with the city administrator or closely thereafter and really come to brass tacks. This is the city administrator's recommended budget to you. And so Eric will make a formal, comprehensive recommendation for a series of revenues and expenditures to you on May 12th. That budget will then go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for first reading on the 24th of May. We will publish a notice in the paper of record, which we are legally required to do by the state of Tennessee, no later than May 27th. So it is accessible to the public in that paper of record. And yes, we'll do it on our website, but legally, we still have to use a paper of record. It's through a public notice. Second hearing and the second reading and public hearing of the budget ordinance will be on Tuesday, June 14th. And third and final reading will be Tuesday, June 28th. And Happy New Year. The fiscal year always starts anew on July 1st in the state of Tennessee. So what are we responsible for? Staff is responsible for producing, in essence, 2 budgets. For a long time now in the city of Franklin, we have made a practice that we ask departments to produce what we call a level services budget. And this year, it may be more important to make that distinction than any other past year. We'll talk about more about that factor when we get into the revenue model. But what we ask for is not a level dollar amount, but how much will it cost to provide the same level of service next year that it did this year? Our goal every year is, if times are good or times are bad, we try to make sure that we can maintain services. Now, this does not mean that budgets will always be the same or that they will go up. Sometimes budgets can go down if services can be delivered in a more efficient way or in a more innovative way. The second budget that they are asked to produce is what we call program enhancements. These will be presented to you, and you'll end up getting 3 items in every departmental budget presentation in Civic Clerk. You'll get a PowerPoint, which will look and feel just like this one, and all of the PowerPoints for all departments look and feel relatively similar. You will receive the formal budget document, which will have narratives and performance measures, and we'll go through that in a second, as well as every line item detail that supports the summaries. So you can see to the nitty-gritty, if you will, exactly what has been asked for in the past and what has been spent in the past. I will warn you, it's a small document. The good news is you do have devices that you can zoom in on. So you can look a little deeper that way. And then finally, a program enhancement packet. There'll be a summary up front. What we have done is we have standardized any request for new service on one piece of paper. So if you want a new person, if you want a new truck, if you want a new program, if you want new salt shed roof was a request last year from the streets department, you fill one piece of paper out and you justify it within that. If you need more information, departments are always happy to give it to you, but you're already bombarded with a lot to try to digest. This is another way to make it standard. Every program enhancement request comes in front of you so that you can see it, and then a summary of all requests which have been made are in the appendix to the budget document at the end of the year. I spend time talking about that simply because we want to make sure that it's transparent. We want to make sure that departments have that opportunity to make those asks. Now, on a given year, probably over the last 5 years, we've had roughly between $12 and $15 million of enhancement requests, of which we probably can afford to fund $3 to $5 million on a good year. But it allows you to see what's been asked for, and the city administrator and staff's judgment will present why we think certain items either make more sense or are more prudent to invest in now as opposed to later. So that budget packet that you receive includes the following items. It will have a mission statement. It will have goals, both short-term objectives and longer-term goals. It will have a narrative of accomplishments, because it is important to put words to the numbers and let departments speak and say what they've accomplished. Performance measures. We do believe in a high-functioning organization, and one of the ways in which we achieve that is to measure, document performance. Those come in 3 forms: workload, efficiency, and outcome measures. There will be a 5-year staffing history, so you can see what has been budgeted. Every full-time and part-time position for the last 5 fiscal years for the City of Franklin by department is included in your budget, so you can see growth or holding the line, if you will, as we implemented for the fiscal 21 budget due to the onset of the pandemic. There will be an organization chart, so you can see exactly who reports to who and how that functions. And then, yes, alas, there will actually be numbers. Excuse me. One of the other things that we're proud of here in the City of Franklin is that all departmental budgets are fully integrated into the city's strategic plan, Franklin Forward. And although we will be revisiting the strategic plan with you later on this year, the measures that are contained within that plan are integrated and assigned to every department. So therefore, you don't just have something that rests on a shelf or is a white paper in your strategic plan. You can actually track progress or lack thereof, depending upon the measure, by department. So therefore, they are responsible in the 4 themes of the strategic plan, which are shown on the screen: a safe, clean, livable city, an effective and fiscally sound city government providing high-quality services, quality of life experiences, and maintaining sustainable growth and economic prosperity. Those departmental hearings that come in front of you in the next 3 months are what I refer to, borrowing a historical quote, it's their moment in the sun. It's an opportunity for departments to come directly to you and say who they are. You get to see all of them. Many of them you see during board meetings, but you don't always get a chance to literally listen and hear, what does the streets department do? What do we provide for park services? What are the chief concerns of the police department? We just don't have time in a work session or a voting session to do that, which is why we have the committee structure you have and the opportunity to come in front of you and ask for certain services, but also to ask, how are things going? We take all of those requests. We monitor them, we start to integrate them, we take all base budget needs, and we compare them against the available resources, which we will give you a detailed presentation in about 15 minutes on, and then build a balanced, uniform budget recommendation endorsed by the city administrator, and then, as I said, it will be presented to you on May 12th. And we, of course, will monitor them throughout the process once the fiscal year begins and make amendments like we presented to you last meeting, January 11th. That's what we do. What do you do? Well, over the next 5 months, we ask that you be ready and prepared. Today, we're going to talk about goals. We're going to give you this overview now. We're going to give you revenue estimates. We're going to have every department come in front of you over 6 meetings, February, March, and April. And then in May, the city administrator will give his formal submission. We ask that you review the materials that you're given. It will be a lot. There's no way to kind of go around that, but we try to make it as streamlined and as accessible as possible. Your base budget, your program enhancement, and then any other supplemental presentations or materials that you have prior to the meetings, or if you want more, we are more than happy to get you some afterwards. And we want you to be critical. This is your budget. This is your money, your taxpayers, and you're representing the taxpayers of the city of Franklin. We pride ourselves on a good product, but we also believe in data-driven decision-making. And resources should not be asked for by staff unless there's a compelling reason to go and invest them. In summary, this process is one of the most important things that you'll do every year. We believe in an open and transparent process which empowers departments to ask for resources, but also to be innovative and seek new solutions. We do believe in data-driven decision-making, but not for the sake of just to create data and to monitor it, but for the benefit of our citizens and our taxpayers. And, not surprisingly, it takes all of us. Eric, Christine, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, we really do try to focus on a budget that doesn't just reflect what you're going to spend, but what you're seeking to get for the community, achieve within the community. And that's why we do provide broader context. We do measure our performance over time, and that is something we integrate into the budget as well. So that is our goal, and your guidance is critical to us getting there. So this is kicking off that process. I appreciate what Michael has provided you, the leadership he provides and that our finance team provides, helping connect you with what the departments, what their work is, what their goals are, and what they hope to achieve is critically important. The other element we ask departments, and we've been asking them to do more of this in recent years, is yes, they're talking to you about the upcoming budget, but we also want them to give you a perspective of what is on the horizon, what's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, especially as you look at some of the capital investments that we're doing. What implications does a new park have on our operational needs? What implications do new facilities at the wastewater treatment plant or whatever it might be, what do those mean for operational considerations down the line? And how are we looking to sustain and enhance services over time, not just balance a budget for a year. And so we hope that we're providing that context as well. Those aren't necessarily things you're always voting on, but they provide a vital context for what our team is trying to achieve and the support we're providing for the guidance and leadership you're providing in the community. So I thank our team. I think this is a process we continually try to improve every year, and your input is critical to us doing that as well.
Any questions of either Michael, the city administrator, or Catherine, or Christine, excuse me, on the budget process?
Just one thing that I wanted to say, I noticed that you mentioned something about our fire, but what, we haven't said to everyone the AAA bond rating that we have and how few cities there are in the state of Tennessee that have that.
Right, just in context, yeah, we had the fire rating we talked about, fully accredited police department, all these other elements, the AAA bond rating, not just a AAA bond rating, but a AAA bond rating from two agencies, puts us in a pretty exclusive group, both within the state but across the country. I don't know the exact numbers now, but at one point, when you looked at a double AAA rating from two different agencies or more, that's a pretty small group across the country, somewhere around 100 or so cities. It may be a little larger than that now, but it's a pretty select group. And one of the things we do in our policy formation is to try to look at other AAA cities, but also look at AAA cities that are experiencing pretty dynamic growth. And there aren't many of those. Most AAA cities are kind of built out and more static in terms of there just isn't the dynamics and moving parts that we see. So our comparative group is pretty small that have a AAA level, but also a pretty dynamic growth component going on in their community. So those are important guidelines and an important achievement. And it speaks to what we do as a city team and our policies and practices, but it also speaks about the vibrancy and strength of the local economy. And so all of those factor in, and we're proud of that, and that is a guiding element in what we do to make sure we are doing everything we can to sustain that highest possible bond rating.
Any other questions or comments? All right, if not, let's go to item 5, which is consideration of resolution 20-21, or 2021-188, the resolution to adopt budget goals for FY 2022-2023. Eric, you're on that item.
I will kick that off. One of the things that we do at the beginning of our process is establish the goals and what we hope to achieve at the end. And the budget that I will propose to you in May, we will do everything we can to meet the goals that are laid out here. So we provide those to you. You look at the goals. They're in 3 general categories: financial goals, non-financial goals, and then year-specific or fiscal year 23 goals. Those financial goals themselves are really a foundation. They tend to stay about the same every year. They really provide for a financial base for everything we do in establishing those goals. And I won't go through every goal, but I'll hit a few highlights. In that financial goal category, we talk about maintaining a structurally balanced budget, meaning our ongoing revenues and our ongoing expenditures are in sync, that we're making those match so that we don't have a long-term issue with not being able to support and sustain services. We do look at having, as much as we can, a diverse revenue and stability there to help support services. As you'll see, as you look and hear later from Catherine and Michael, in the revenue model, we are heavily dependent on sales tax. We look at ways to protect ourselves so that we're not overly impacted by economic changes, but that is an inherent fact of life for us. That's why we have some of the policies and guidance we have, which are also part of your financial goals related to your reserves, the level of reserves that we strive to maintain and exceed, the debt policy that we have, all speak to maintaining financial stability, but also meeting the needs of the community, whether it's services or supporting our investments. And the non-financial goals, just highlight a couple key things. Of course, the foundation there is maintaining a high level of service to the community, that we're meeting the needs of our residents, businesses, and visitors, that we're focused on the delivery of the key infrastructure projects included in your approved 10-year capital investment plan, that we're looking for ways to be as strong as we can from an economic development standpoint, that we're highly competitive, that we're partnering with the state of Tennessee, with Williamson County, and others to make sure that we are striving to have the highest level of economic prosperity and economic opportunity in our community and for our citizens. That we look to maintain, part of maintaining strong services is having the best quality staff team that we can, and that we look at ways to develop the individuals that serve this community as professionals so that they are doing their best work. We provide a great work environment, that's all part of it. And again, that we provide a strong, sustainable community. Now, the year-specific goals, I want to touch on a few key things that I think are unique to this year and particularly important. The fourth goal on this list, but really number one from my perspective, is the update of the city's compensation plan. We were due to make that update when the pandemic kicked in the spring of 2020. We had made a commitment when we updated the compensation plan back in 2013 to look at it every year, but do a comprehensive update around every 3 to 4 years. We were due for that in 2020, and the pandemic threw a major wrench into that. We were reducing budgets and making sure we could make things work, and it wasn't the time to do it. There was still a lot of uncertainty a year ago, so we held it off then, but now's the time. We still have a lot of moving parts and a lot of uncertainty, but it's an important component, and the board has acted strongly already this year, improving a mid-fiscal year cost of living adjustment to address some of the pressures of inflation that are impacting the city, and especially our city team members. So really supporting that updated compensation plan. We put benchmarks in place for that as well, where we want to be in the labor market, both against comparable cities, but also where there's a private sector comparative. We want to make sure we're highly competitive. And so that compensation plan will give us guidance on that. And I think one of our primary goals needs to be supporting and implementing whatever comes out of that compensation plan so that we maintain our competitive position. A couple other items that are in this that may or may not have significant budget implications, but are really critical from a strategic management and leadership and guidance standpoint is, first, we're in the midst of the lead up now, but we'll start formally later this year, the update of the countywide growth plan. This hasn't been done for over 20 years. We'll look at and re-examine the urban growth boundaries and some of the key elements that will influence growth, not only in Franklin, but across the county. And we are one of the if not the first county in the state of Tennessee to update their growth plan in this way. So that's going to be important, and we need to make sure our budget and our approach is going to support that. Again, I don't necessarily see that being a huge price tag, but it's going to be a major element of our work plan during fiscal th. The other element I would touch on that Michael talked about as well, and we've talked about it as the new board took their seats in the fall, is the idea that we would need to update our strategic plan. It was originally formulated in about 2013. We've done some tweaks and updates over the years, but it's time to take another look at it, especially in light of the fact that we have new board members, that we need to make sure your voice and the voice of the community is incorporated in updating that plan. So we translate that plan into what forms and shapes our budget in future years and our long-term strategic planning, not only as a plan, but also that influences things like our land use plan, our infrastructure plans related to our parks, our water and sewer utilities, our transportation network. All of those hang together. And then ultimately that we are striving to be a community achieving the highest quality of life and quality of services to our community that we can. and that we're working on key issues, whether it's affordable and attainable housing, whether it's transportation issues, both within Franklin and in the broader region. All of those elements are supported within the work of our team in the year to come and beyond. So that's what we hope to achieve in these goals. I've tried to give you a highlight of what those key elements are. What we would ask for you to do is give us feedback tonight, if you'd like to, and then also advance this on for the board to consider at the January 25th board meeting, so that we have these in place as we start our discussions with the committee and bring a proposed or recommended budget forward to you in May. This will help formulate all of that. So I'll stop there and glad to answer any questions. Michael, Christine, Catherine, if there's anything else you want to add to what we've provided, please speak up. Anything else?
Any questions from any of the committee members?
My one question is, whenever you mention the strategic plan,
Yeah.
are you talking about Envision Franklin or something much more than that?
I'm talking about the Franklin Forward Plan, which is our broader strategic plan, and we've got probably about 60 measures that relate to supporting different elements of that strategic plan, and you'll see those scattered throughout all the departmental budgets. Those are key measures that influence their work and reflect their priorities in service. So we want to look at updating that, see, are we capturing the right priorities? Are we measuring the right thing? Ultimately, are we measuring the right things in the community in terms of what we're trying to achieve in those goals? So it's really kind of updating that to make sure we're reflecting our reality now and what your goals are for the community.
Any other questions?
No, this time.
We do have one visiting alderman who is not on the committee, Alderman Hanson. Do you have any, Alderman Hanson, do you have any questions? All right. Then I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2021-188 with stipulation that the approved motion from this committee goes to the full board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Proper motion is second. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you
Yes.
vote? Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Motion is approved, 4-0. Item 6, presentation of the FY 2023 revenue model. Christine, are you starting that off, or is Michael?
Well, I will start with, we're glad to have joined us for, this year as our management fellow, Catherine Harrelson, and she has done an excellent job assisting so many of us in different aspects of her time with us, and she's going to be joining, and she's been joining us in the budget process for the last several months. So I appreciate Catherine being part of this team, and she's been asking me some questions as she's prepared for this presentation. That gave me a good chance to go back and certainly look at kind of how do we put together revenue projections for very detailed line items within a city budget. So I know I'll give this to Michael, but we do express our appreciation for Catherine for being with us this year.
Michael?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget and Finance Committee, let's get going. We will start, and I will start with doing a series of economic, kind of an economic overview to set the broader table. And then we'll work through the assumptions, some broad assumptions regarding the revenue model, and then the model itself and other assumptions will be covered by my colleague, Ms. Harrelson. We will do select category and fund breakouts. You have 2 items in your packet. You have this presentation, which I will go through, and then you also have a 30-page comprehensive revenue model. All funds in the city are covered in that model. We want to start the year with what we have, not what we want, and so that's why revenues are always here in January. This will be refined. Unequivocally, especially in a year like this one, this will be refined and these estimates will be refined by the time you see the formal presentation in May. So you may have noticed there's a little bit of instability in the world. This slide, unfortunately, has not changed greatly from last year. We had instability in the world and then COVID hit. and it remains. The pandemic is nowhere near done. And the impacts to the broader economic systems, and one can argue other systems, but this is a finance presentation, so we're going to talk about economic systems, continue. 2 years ago, we were sitting here talking about the broader stability of the city of Franklin and overall where we were, and inflation was low, and things seemed, we were worried about a potential election in November, but otherwise we were feeling good. And we had just gotten out of a month earlier leadership team meeting and doing a leadership retreat, talking about what we had done in the last decade and gearing up to being an all-American city. And then, things happened. We were enjoying the longest continuous economic expansion in our nation's history. And then March of 2020 happened. An unforeseen and unexperienced economic shock occurred. We shut down entire industries. And the prudent thing to do, and if there's one word that dictates what we do in financial model in the city of Franklin, is we believe in prudence. We forecast that we could lose millions of dollars in fiscal year 2020. Logic said any economic shock like that, it's going to take time to rebound. And keep in mind, one of the basic principles of government financing, whatever happens in the market hits us last because we get our money through taxes. And it's based upon activity or the value of property, which means something has occurred in the broader economy, and then we feel it at the end. So markets can come out of economic downturns quicker than we will as a result of that maxim. Rather than losing $5 to $8 million, which was our original forecast in fiscal 2020, we broke even. And in 2021, we advised continued prudence. We thought it's going to take time for the economy to rebound. Sales taxes, we're not so sure. There'll probably be some lag. Tourism, for sure, is not going to come back for years. And as you heard in your last meeting, we had the largest fund balance closure in the city's history of over $12 million. We do our best. There was just no way for us to forecast really that was going to happen. Blessings be that it did, but it does make our job as analysts a little difficult. So where are we now? On January 20th, 2022 at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon, there's more uncertainty now than there ever has been in our professional careers from an economic forecasting standpoint. Let's start with the federal government. The federal economic policy over the last 22 months, when you take the COVID stimulus packages that were passed in March and April, and then you take subsequent stimulus packages in the beginning of this year, and then you add in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the IIJA, for those of us who live in acronyms, over $7 trillion has been pumped into the economy by the federal government. That's a lot of money, I believe, would be. I went to school for that. Millions of workers have not rejoined the workforce. That is primarily a factor of the ongoing pandemic. It is a safety issue or concern. For millions more, it is simply an issue of childcare. All systems are lacking workers because, due to the safety concerns, due to the inability to vaccinate the youngest of children, you have parents that have come out of the workforce because they have to take care of their children. Not surprisingly, millions of jobs are available. And right now, there's very hardly any place you can go that doesn't have a help wanted sign. Certainly we do. If you look at our job postings, that's true in every sector, in every industry, in this country and throughout the world. And we are all struggling to recruit and retain employees. But the weird part is that unemployment is at record lows. November 2021 data shows that nationally unemployment is at 3.9%. And in Williamson County, it's 2.1%. And in the city of Franklin, preliminary November 2021 numbers are at 1.9%. That, by any definition, is full employment, even though we have millions of workers who are out of work. Because of all of those factors, you also have supply chain shortages. This is also pandemically influenced. Factories have had to shut down or be curtailed. Governments have restricted access across borders. Trade has been heavily strained. Transportation hubs have been backed up. And as a result, it's harder to get goods and services in a timely basis. That, plus the infusion of a large amount of government subsidy, plus pent-up demand from citizens who could not spend their money as they normally would in travel or in leisure or in durable goods, have led to a tremendous amount of desire to spend. I would testify to you today that the issue of our times is, this moment is not the ability to pay, it is the ability to purchase. So what does that lead you to? Increased demand with a whole lot of ability to pay and a lack of supply gets you the I word. It gets you inflation. Most of us in our professional careers have not really dealt with inflation. We just haven't. We have not seen inflation at this level since the first Reagan administration in the early 80s and the dreaded years of stagflation back in the 1970s. The chart on the screen shows it very plainly. This has been updated since you last saw it in November for the COLA considerations. For the last 10 years, the average calendar year increase in the CPI for the South region of the United States, where we live, of course, is 1.4%, and for the fiscal year is 1.8%. 2 months ago, that 6-month average was 5.5%. Today, it's 6.6%. The December 2021 inflation report for the South region showed inflation of 7.4% and a core inflation rate, when you take out the volatiles of food and energy, of 6%. Without a doubt, if you think things are more expensive, you would be correct. Where do we think we're going? Well, inflation's not going to go away. It'll take time for it to tamper back down. In our requests to departments, and the budget manual is submitted, and it was part of item 4, along with the budget process, we give departments guidance on what to make, what assumptions to make when requesting level services. For fiscal 23, that assumption was if you don't have a contract or you don't have guidance of anticipation of what a supply will cost, go up 5.5% from the previous year. And go up 3% in your 24 projections and 3% in your 25 projections. It will take a while, and most economists agree on this. It will take a while to get back to the Fed funds rate target of 2. It's just where we live. Supply chain issues are not going to iron themselves out very quickly, and supply of jobs will continue to be open, but until the pandemic is under control and people can rejoin the workforce and those blockages can get broken up and things can get moving again, we're going to kind of be where we are. That's the pessimistic start to this presentation, and I apologize for that, because the city of Franklin, and we've worked very hard to do this, even in a maelstrom outside, our revenue picture is largely stable, healthy, and growing. And for that, we turn it over to Ms. Harrelson.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Christine, for that wonderful introduction earlier. I'm very fortunate to be a part of this team and really fortunate to be able to present in front of all of you today. Michael gave me the gift of giving y'all good news. So I would like to walk through with y'all the revenue model for fiscal year 2023. As Michael said, the economy today is uncertain and unpredictable. So the whole basis of this revenue model is very conservative, prudently conservative. I do want to walk through with y'all kind of how the revenue model is structured. I know Alderman Barnhill and Alderman Peterson, y'all are both very well aware of the revenue model, but I want to walk through our new members and just show you kind of how it is structured. We have 14 funds represented in our revenue model, and it is all through the budget process, which is annually approved. You will see that we have lists of actuals, and then next to it, we have our forecasts that have a low, medium, and high value. It gives us the best educated range about where our revenues will go in the next year. We always budget with the medium value. So the medium value that you see on your forecast is typically what we will budget for in the next year. Our preliminary revenue assessment is based off of three things. It is based off the Tennessee State Funding Board, which met in November of '21. They had several presentations regarding the state of the economy, both nationally and state. And we take a lot of their revenue projections and we mirror them. We do try to stay conservative, as is one of our values. And the January model in particular is always conservative. I know, again, Alderman Peterson, Alderman Barnhill know, when we receive our funds from the state or our revenues from the state, it's about 2 months behind. So right now we only have about 4 months of actuals. So when we give you a revised number in a few months, we will have more data to give you a better picture about where the next year is going to be. I will start with all funds. As you can see, we have all 14 funds represented here. Starting with our largest fund, which is obviously the general fund. It represents about half of all revenues. And even down to our smallest fund, which is our drug fund, which represents literally 1/10 of a percent. In fiscal year '22, we are estimating that we will collect about $172.7 million. In fiscal year '23, we are projecting an increase to $180.7 million. That's an increase of about $8 million, or about 4.6%. And that is reflected in the state projections as well. And then I'm going to go through the general fund. Since it is our largest, it is our most important. We have, in fiscal year '22, we are estimating that we will collect about $86.1 million. And in fiscal year '23, we are projecting to collect about $91.7 million. That's an increase of about $5.6 million, or 6.6%. And I just want to remind y'all, this is limited to actually only 4 years of actual, 4 months, excuse me, of actual collections. So this will be revised. Just to kind of repeat what Eric was saying earlier in our budget process, or our budget goals, the reliance that we have on our sales and use tax is reflected here, with 78.5% of our revenues coming from consumption. So when we see the higher inflation rates and we see the higher growth in sales tax, we can see that represented here when our revenue is divided by source. Next slide, please. Breaking down the general fund, we'll start with our local sales tax, and you'll find that on page 6 of your revenue model. In FY22, we are estimating to take in $47.1 million. And in FY23, we are projecting to get $52.2 million. That's an increase of about $5 million, and it's about 10.67% increase. That seems a bit high, but when you actually take into account that we got higher than anticipated actual collections so far, each month we're getting about 2.2% increase than what we budgeted. And then we're also taking into account the 5.5% inflation rate. And so what we did was we took those two factors and we had a modest growth rate of about 3%, which is conservative and even a little bit more conservative than what the state is projecting. We will also be continuing to monitor these numbers, and this projection will be revised again in the spring. And then just a closer focus on the local sales tax. On average, we're having a year-over-year increase of about 3.9%. So when I said earlier that we're projecting about a 3% growth in the next year, it's to highlight that we're trying to be very prudently conservative in this estimate. And then to even break down further in our averages, in FY21 compared to FY20, we show an increase of about 18.5%. This is reflective of what Michael said, that we tried to be very prudently conservative in FY20 when the pandemic started. And so in FY21, as we're trying to rebound from the pandemic, we came out relatively unscathed. So the growth projections were a bit higher than what we'd normally expect. If we look at our 10-year average, we're seeing it now a growth about 4.8%. So when we go from 25 years to 10 years, we're seeing that our year-over-year growth rate is increasing. And I just want to point out that the state, in the state funding board presentations, all 4 presentations gave a estimate of what the sales tax growth was going to be. And it ranged from 2.5% to 6.9%. And so the City of Franklin's local sales tax, we're trying to mirror what the state is projecting, but we're taking more of a conservative approach. Next, I want to get into our state shared tax collection. In FY22, we're estimating to collect $12.9 million. In FY23, we're projecting to collect about $15 million. That's an increase of about 2.1 million, or 16.32%. And you can see in the chart there, it goes from sales tax to beer tax and business taxes, and they're all mostly showing increases. And we have the assumptions behind this are year-to-date collections have greatly exceeded our FY22 budget numbers, and that is a lot due to a lot of inflation. And also, I want to highlight that this is the second year that the city is getting a portion of the sports gaming revenues, and we are projecting that we will receive anywhere between $70,000 to $100,000 a year. Next, I want to talk about the property tax, and this is laid out a bit differently than the other pieces of our general fund. We receive a total assessment, and then portions of our property tax is taken out and put in different funds. So we have a net general that is accounted for in the general fund, and if you'll go and look in your model, you'll see other pieces that go to different funds in our budget. So our total assessment for FY22, we are estimating to take in about $23.2 million. And in FY23, we're projecting a slight increase to $23.5 million. However, when you look at the net general fund, we are looking at in FY22 taking in almost $8 million. And next year, we're projecting to take in about $9.5 million, which is about an increase of 11%. This growth, we're taking into account a modest 3% due to the assessed tax rolls, and we are also accounting for about $1 million in taxes, which were previously paid to the IDB loans. And so we can thank paying off the TIF. Next, I want to do building permits and licenses. This one is a little bit harder to project because it's highly dependent on our development activity. And additionally, permits and fees are often paid before development goes into construction. So it's a little, just because you have a lot of projects being built right now, that doesn't mean we're getting the fees right now. Obviously, in the permitting process, you want to get that done before you want to start building. So I do want to say, that being said, that we're not seeing any kind of reduction in building activity. We just want to be prudently conservative when we're making these estimates because they're a little harder to pin down. In FY22, we're estimating to take in about $2.5 million. And in FY23, we are projecting to take in about $2.6 million. So that's about a 3% increase, which I want to point out that is different from last year when we were actually forecasting a decrease in this part of the general fund. The last part of our general fund that I want to highlight is our interest income. And I will say this is probably the one piece that I have to give some bad news. In FY22, we are currently budgeted to take in about $438,000. I will say this will be revised later on. In FY23, we are projecting to take in about $33,000, which is about a 65% decrease. And a big reason for this is due to the federal funds rate decline In FY19, this was pretty much at 2%, and now it is effectively 0%. And I know Christine probably wants to add a bit to this, so I will pass it off to her.
I did want to give just a little context for the reduction in this estimate, because certainly there has been increases in the last year or so in some treasury rates. However, a couple of things that does impact how we make estimates for these investment earnings is that we do maintain a strategy of keeping our duration on our investments even when rates are low, because certainly we do not have many options for investing governmental funds. We do have an investment policy that the board approved several years ago and has amended or revised a couple of times to be current. To keep in accordance with state law, we have a target of 1.5 years for our investment duration, and we are right at that. So certainly, though, while we do want to generate investment earnings for the city, safety and liquidity of our funds are our first and second priority of managing the cash and investment management for the city, and managing public funds. So we did have a good year a couple of years ago when we were able to earn about 2% or a little over. We do keep a good amount of our liquid funds in a state local government investment pool, which actually is paying us 2 basis points. That is a Department of Treasury fund by the state of Tennessee. There's not a lot of banks that really want to hold large amounts of governmental funds because of the collateral requirements, and collateral costs banks money. So they're not going to pay us a lot of investment earnings on these short-term funds. So we also have our current banking arrangement on our operating accounts has a 1% floor that we keep all the funds that we possibly can up to that limit. And then every single week, we make sure that we have the maximum that we can keep in that 1% account, and then move whatever is left into the account that doesn't pay us much of anything. So right now, there's the management, the cash management, there's lots of activity going on, but we just don't have a lot of investment earnings to show for it. But we do know that is only one aspect that we are to keep into mind. Certainly keeping the safety of our city's money and paying our bills on time are what we primarily have to do. So we do, certainly, I'm not an economist, but just what I read from economists is that that the market has priced in, I believe, maybe 4 increases in 2022, 3 or 4 increases in the Fed funds rate. Somewhere down the line that will help us. However, we do have to we have to budget what we see, and we also do have to do what's called a mark-to-market posting of our investments. We do always intend to hold our investments to maturity, and with a duration of 1.5 years. That's not very long, but as low as investments have been, as we see some rise in interest rates, there is a little bit of a mark-to-market loss that we post. However, once we hold to maturity, those do not become realized losses. So that's a flavor of what we are dealing with when it comes to cash management. But if there is a point in which, and we do have, and actually, I know you'll look forward to this, but every fall, usually in September, we spend this meeting doing an investment update for this committee, and Alderman Peterson and Alderman Barnhill have heard that the last several years in great detail. So I know you'll be looking forward to that, and we talk about investments in great detail. But we will certainly, this committee and the full board in the next few months will be hearing what the proposal will be for the next banking contract, and that is the contract that currently, that's expiring, has that 1% floor. So we will see what the proposals are this go around, but we will not have that 1% contract for the next budget year.
And I do want to note, Catherine touched on it, the $438,750 figure you see in the budget, we will be revising downward in a future budget amendment. You know, these assumptions which are made, and it's true in all cases, when you project originally, we do have a heavy reliance, even though previous returns are not an indication of future returns. We logically look and see what we've done. If you look at the past 2 years in 19 and 20, they were some of the largest and most stable and sizable amounts of earnings that we had had in quite some time. We knew it was going to go down. We just didn't know that 21 was going to be a quarter of what we forecast for this fiscal year. So that will be coming back to you probably in the May amendment once we actually get further into the fiscal year and we can see kind of where we are.
Before I move on, sorry, if y'all have any questions on the general fund, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, am I looking at that, the decrease of 405,000 and 65% of what? Go ahead.
So that is a decrease in 65% of the previous fiscal year.
Of the 438,000?
Yeah, so the 438,000, the change from that to the 32,000 is a 65% decrease.
No.
It's a lot more than that.
It's a
Is
lot
it?
more, yeah, it's a lot
About a
more.
90%
Yeah, it's a lot
decrease.
more than that.
Yeah, it is. There's a formulaic error in page 15. Because 32,871 is 65% of the fiscal 21 actual of the 93.9. And so yeah, that should be a decrease of like 92
Yeah.
or so. So,
Yep.
yeah.
My apologies on that.
And before you go on, number two, in one of those slides, there was an increase of 5 million on sales tax. Now, is that the half-cent sales tax that we got in its entirety? Because because we gave 22 million to the county school system, which meant that we were giving up $7 million a year. So if you're saying it's 5 million increase, would it not be more than that?
So we're averaging about an additional $700,000 every month from that half a percent that we got from the county, from the Williamson County Schools.
So 7 times 12 is 8.4 million.
Correct. Now, the key here is this $5 million is an apples to apples where that $700,000 is already baked into the base. Because we started getting that extra $700,000 in April of 21. So the last we now have 8 months worth of collections where that additional amount of money is added in. This $5 million increase is comprised of 3 factors. It's what we've actually collected to date above expectations in fiscal 22. It's adding 5.5% to what we think we're going to be taking in per month in fiscal 22. And you take that as a total times 3%. That's how you're getting this $5 million or 10.7%.
Okay.
The $700,000 is already in all of fiscal 22. What surprised us is the fact that we knew, and if you look at the large increase on page 4 or page 6, excuse me, you can see from 20 to 21 to 22 there you were going to have that increase. And we knew that for 9 months of the fiscal year, month over month in 22, it's going to be much larger than 21 because it's an apple to an orange. We didn't have the collection, and then we did. What we did not expect is that we would be seeing such high collections above what we had the previous month, year over year, after that was included. And that's what we're seeing now month over month in local sales tax receipts.
And
If that makes sense.
And if I could give a little context to there was that 3-year period in which the the voters had approved the additional sales tax, but as Alderman Barnhill said, that the city did not realize its share. The city had given up funding to the schools. We tracked during that period on a monthly basis what we were giving to the schools. And the last 9 months that the schools we were in that program, that was where the average monthly gift to the county schools was $700,000. So that's where, now true that the last 9 months of that program was a low time in sales tax given the world that we were in. However, that was the last 9 months that we were in the 3-year period. And so that should have been a pretty conservative number to use for budgeting. And that was where, as we looked at this new budget, we used the $700,000 monthly estimate of what we gave up to the schools in preparing the fiscal '22 budget. So it was conservative, and certainly as we've got into we actually just yesterday received sales tax for the month of November, so it's hot off the presses. So certainly for the 5 months of this fiscal year, sales taxes have increased greater each month than we had projected, even with knowing that the school what we had given to the schools was going to end. So it has been eight months since we ended that program. We have averaged $4.5 million a month during that span for monthly sales tax receipts, and so that's a significant increase from even where we were before the pandemic period hit, and then we started. We saw some, something beyond the seasonality that we typically see in sales tax. So we've had an average of $4.5 million a month since we've entered the program, this period, now that we're into receiving our share of the 2.75% local option sales tax rate.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I had the same question as Alderman Barnhill. I just want to make sure I understand it. So fiscal year 2022 included an assumption beginning in April that we were going to receive that additional revenue.
Fiscal 21, actually.
21 assumed that.
Assumed the beginning of April of that year, you would be going up by
Excuse me, yeah.
$750,000 every month. And then the first 9 months of fiscal 22, July through March,
Got it.
would have that additional $700,000 added to it. And then the base would be the same every month after that.
I think the spirit of probably the question that Alderman Barnhill had and the one that I also have is that I think we have a responsibility to kind of know as that new revenue is coming through, kind of where it is, what it's being spent on, and making sure we can kind of insulate that to some degree. We don't need to go into, I could be wrong, but I think that's a massive new revenue stream. And I believe there were some, I'd be curious to know the preconditions. I know some of them that when that was passed, but just being able to kind of singularly look at that, at least, I'm sure there'll be other questions about that from the general board. And so being able to see that, everyone fully understand that as we present the revenue models and know, or this is where, I think, in seeing that a little more clearly, because there will be questions. And I know the public has the questions too, coming off the campaign trail. There's lots of talk about that, and just want to make sure that we can clearly communicate. I understand how it is in the budget, but in the year over year. But that intuitively, as a person of the public would look at it like as I looked at it, was like, well, that's $5 million. Thought we were getting more than that.
So it's important to understand that our general framework for what we will do and do with those funds from several years going on now is that we would split them roughly 50-50 annually. Half of that, and again, this is going to sound a little complicated, and we try not to do this, but half of the half that we're getting
Right.
would go to operations, and the other half of that half would go to capital. When we built the fiscal 21 budget, 100% of that half which we only got for 3 months, went into operations because of where we stood with COVID. It all needed to go to operations at that point. To date, 2.32 million has gone to capital. That was built in part of your original budget that you approved for fiscal '22 effective July 1. It's our plan to see where we are again for the May amendment versus what the actual collections are. So what we can, because by the time we get 8 months into the year, we can have a more refined estimate as to what that 0.5% really comes to. And then the spirit, if you will, is that half of that amount, say it's 700,000 or 8.4, the spirit would say that $4.2 million annually would be transferred into the capital fund for use in projects, and the balance would remain within the general fund for operations.
Understood, and I think just us being able and armed and not and be able to communicate that would be great. The other thing, set real quick, is the inflation assumptions. I'd just say that for the years 24, 25, I don't know why we would back off. I mean, with $7 trillion, I mean, we're not gonna get into those weeds either, but to be conservative, that just seems like it's not as much as, because that's a lot of money. I mean, I don't know anyone that's expecting inflation to reduce in the next year.
Well, keep in mind that when we say fiscal '24, that means that we are assuming that the annualized rate of inflation starting July 1 of '23 and going to June 30th of '24 would be roughly 3%.
Okay.
So that's still 18 months out. And the other thing is we use those as projections, but you're only voting on an inflationary factor for what you're going to need to fund
This year.
operations in the next 12 months.
Okay.
That number is the 5.5%, and we will certainly revisit 24 when we do.
And the
next
reason I
year's
say
budget.
is because as we look at these other capital projects in the future and the cost of construction and everything going up, the inflation affects everything. And I just would like to be conservative in understanding what money we'll have available and being more conservative on the inflation. I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen $7 trillion pumped into the economy. We haven't. And so that I just, as we look at big projects like City Hall and other things, being more conservative would be. Anyway, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Sir.
And to Alderman Baggett's comments, that's one of the reasons that I have strongly suggested that we have a capital projects meeting to understand if we're pumping $300 and something thousand per month back into with 3 and 12, 36, $4 million back into that, what that does to the projects that we've got and how it functions. And that's reasons I've asked, and I know I've asked half a dozen times, we need that in order to understand, well, we need it in order to understand where we are on the City Hall and where we are on the rest of the capital improvements projects that we've got listed. So I think it's a good comment, a good question. And I was looking, say, $700,000. Where is the federal government's 4.7 million into this right here? How is that in there? Because we do 9.4 million?
9.2.
9.2, so 4.6.
Yes.
So I gave it some interest there before we, yeah.
The federal government generally doesn't give us interest.
I agree.
They will in your
Not generally, probably never.
So the American Rescue Plan Act funds are not included in this presentation whatsoever.
Okay,
Well, let me revise that. They actually are included in this presentation. I misspoke. Under grants. Okay. And the reason that is done is because you'll note there's $3.2 million set aside for fiscal '23. Our original plan, which we continue to revise, is that we were going to spend that 9.2 roughly in 3 truncheons, and we would allocate it in fiscal '22, '23, and '24.
right.
Those monies are generally to be used for capital projects or for revenue loss. You'll see then that they also appear in other funds if they've been used as a transfer. One of the things that's hard to get your teeth around when doing just one side of the ledger is that when it comes to where is that money going, that'll be April. We don't mean to do it to make it more confusing, but simply because this is what we've got presentation versus how we're going to end up spending it.
So grants may be 3.4 million, but there will be expenditures in other fund balances, in other revenue fund. There'll be grant line items in other funds where you've assumed
Right.
that money's gone.
And part of that is the accounting aspect of how we have to handle those funds.
Well,
Christine?
and we'll also give the example of that an allowable use is for water and sewer projects. And so let's give the example of a $1 million water and sewer project that would need to be recorded in the separate water and sewer utility fund. It would not be in the general fund.
Got it.
Any other questions or comments? You have, okay, keep going.
So now that we've finished up with the general fund, I'm going to move forward to the sanitation fund. And you can find that on page 19 of your revenue model. So the sanitation fund is basically fees collected that from both residential and commercial garbage disposal. And so in FY22, we're estimating that we're going to collect about $10.7 million. And we're going to have a very slight increase, or we're projecting a very slight increase in FY23 of about $267. So that's virtually 0%. Yes. So I do want to note that if you look at the chart in FY22, you'll see a slight decrease as compared to FY21. The reason for that is we removed a one-time subsidy of a capital purchase from the general fund. So that's the only reason why FY22 is a little lower than FY21. And then next, I want to touch on our development-related funds. That is our road impact, city and county facilities, and parkland dedication funds. You will see that the increases and even a slight decrease, they vary widely. These are a lot of it's due to severe reductions that we made in FY21 due to anticipated but not actually realized impacts on development due to the pandemic. So we are kind of rebounding as we go through. These funds are all heavily dependent on the timing of new development. So these forecasts could also increase or decrease. So these will also be revised. I also want to note that city facilities and county facilities, you'll notice that there's a 20% increase for the county facilities, but a 3% decrease in city facilities. You'll notice in your revenue model for the city facilities, there's a contributions from others that was included that we don't have included in the forecast. So that affected the overall number.
That's the one-time contribution from Williamson County for Fire Station 7. So that will hit this fiscal year. Obviously, it's not recurring. It will not happen next year.
Yeah. So next is our hotel motel tax fund that you'll find on page 25. So with this one in FY22, we are estimating to take in about $3.6 million. And we are expecting that to slightly decrease in FY23 to about $3.3 million. Overall, our forecast with this one, the COVID-19 pandemic did take a sizable hit on our hospitality and tourism industry. The good news is that revenues have rebounded faster than we anticipated coming out as we go through the pandemic. We do believe it'll take a little bit longer to fully recover to our pre-pandemic levels. But the decrease that you see here of 8%, that is because we are not showing ARPA funding in this revenue model. So that is the only reason why there is about an 8% decrease in this forecast.
And I'll note, you've now seen it in a couple of different funds. Things, sanitation, city facilities, hotel, motel. Overall, we're projecting net increases or gross increases in fees collected, in occupancy stays, in building activity. But because there were one-time applications, general fund subsidies to buy trucks, the invoice from the county's contribution to Fire Station 7, ARPA funding for revenue loss, yes, it's technically a decrease. But the positive here is that we are forecasting net activity increases, I guess would be the best way of phrasing it.
And then finally, we have our water sewer fund. And I do want to note that the water and sewer fund contributes to operations only. In FY '22, we are estimating to take in about $35 million. In FY '23, we are forecasting to a slight increase to about $35.8 million. That's an increase of about 2.7%. This is due to we're staying at our previous increases of about 2.9% for our water rates and 3.5% for sewer. That was started in calendar year '21, and we're continuing in calendar year '22. And with that, overall, I just want to close with that we expect, we are optimistic about next year in our revenue, but it's a cautious optimism. Obviously, you've been hearing from us all afternoon about the unpredictability and the uncertainty in the economy and the market today. The economy did not contract as much as we anticipated in 2020. And we rebounded faster than we expected in 2021. So many industries, especially here in Franklin, are very solid, but events out of our control temper expectations and uncertainty remains. And with that, I will close out with some next steps. We will start doing departmental budget reviews in February, and those will run until April, as you heard earlier, and we will bring back to you in May with a revised revenue projection as well as a 5-year forecast. So with that, I am happy to take any questions that y'all may have.
Any questions or comments?
The only takeaway I'd say is just that sales tax, I mean, because I heard it we'll have kind of constituents ask, is giving us the tools to be able to effectively and clearly communicate how this budget is delivering on what we said we would do. And I know how technically that's hard to do. It's hard to communicate that with the budget document we have. But if we can have something to be able to, for us to be able to quickly say, yes, we actually are delivering on what was promised, when this was passed, just to preempt those kinds of questions. That's the only thing I would ask to see at some point.
We can certainly do that. Hopefully, one of the takeaways from this presentation is that there's a degree of uncertainty, and it is largest in our consumption-based taxes.
Yeah.
Development activity is pretty stable. The property tax base is stable. There is such a rate of increase right now in the sales tax, which is not attributable
To that, yeah.
to the rate increase.
Sure.
That's really hard for us to try to filter out the reasons why. Part of it is the government infusion of cash and everybody getting stimulus checks, but we think that part has passed. Part of it is probably the pent-up demand. Part of it unequivocally is inflation, because as the sales cost
Right.
increases
So
and the percentage of the tax remains the same, we get the benefit of getting more money. That's why we kind of hedge our bets and say, this is where we are now, but we're going to tell you a lot more when it comes to May, as we try to figure out what some of those contributors are.
Sure. And that's
So
fine.
as we move forward, we'll give you some more of that, but from a community impact and what was hoped for and what has happened, first of all, remember, every dollar of local sales tax that we report to you, that same amount is going to schools.
Right.
So when we collect local sales tax, 50/50
Yep.
to the city, the jurisdiction in which it was collected, and the other half goes to public schools. So Williamson County Schools and Franklin Special School District, when we're seeing those increases, those same increases are being realized in school funding. So that is there, and that remains there throughout. You'll also see and note in our last budget, we did not increase our property tax rate. In fact, it went down with the reappraisal. Not all local governments did that. That happened at other cities, the county, they ended up doing something different with their rate because of their needs. Not a critical statement, just what happened.
Understood.
We were able to, yeah, we did not have to go to that well. So I think that is reflective of what we realized in sales tax. The other thing, just a quick note, and you'll see this again next Tuesday when we talk about the capital investment program, but that 10-year plan, when we first rolled that out after we did Invest Franklin, that was around a 50-50 proposition in terms of debt and cash paid for capital investment program. The new model, the model that we're operating under now, is about 64% cash funded, 36% debt funded. So the realization of this sales tax has helped us use less debt, but also increase the pie a little bit too.
Sure.
So, I mean, when you say, what's the bottom line? How has the city benefited from this? I think that
it.
those are some headlines. We can color more of that in for you, but those are things I would say just off the top that I would say you see the benefit of every day that we're seeing in budgets that help us fund operations, but also deliver on projects and really have to do less in debt than we had originally anticipated just a few years ago.
Any other questions or comments? I do have one, specifically, when is the TIF paid off? What day? What can we come down
Throw a
for
party.
for the ribbon cutting?
The TIF district itself does have to remain in place for one more tax year, and that is because of the $2.3 million, which is owed to the city's general fund for debt service, which was paid in the early years of the 2005 loan. So the loan itself that was secured with those revenues has been repaid. The full board allowed us in middle of December to take the steps, and we actually paid that off on December 22nd. And so the loan is gone, but we do have to repay our general fund, the $2.3 million. So I do forecast that we will reduce that liability for 6/30/2022. It should be down probably $1 million, maybe $1.5 million, but we'll do the accounting to repay the city back what is available in this current fiscal year, but we will need to go into one more tax season. And then once we work with the county property assessor and the county trustee that we have fulfilled our obligation to the general fund, then we'll unwind that TIF district.
So this accounts for $1 million of that in the budget, and then the next 24 will have the full 2.6.
Actually, 2.6 million was the
Six.
total revenue in the TIF district for this current year. So what we've been doing for several years was approximately $1 million was the debt service, and then the additional amounts that were available were used to prepay that what became the 2015 loan in advance. So there was $1 million that was a minimum debt service obligation, but we actually, as the incremental property values increased within that TIF district, of course, it started out very minimal, but by the end of the program, we were up at $2.6 million.
And there's still development going on in that district. So that is not a static number. That is, of course, it'll go away, but it is continuing to grow. So that's still adding to our tax base.
So what was being looked at in the modeling was what had been due for that loan. And certainly the loan was supposed to go out to 2025. Mm-hmm. So the modeling for the budget looked at what was due on that loan for a few more budget years. However, once we can collapse that TIF, all of the debt service, all of the property taxes in that increment will belong to the city, and it's not obligated toward a loan the way it was with the TIF loan.
So to your question, yes.
Okay.
That what we have done is we have assumed, and I know this is small, page 8 of your 30-page document. Property tax acts differently than any other part of this revenue model because it is a net revenue, and as Catherine explained. You start with the assessment. In this case, we're estimating 3% on top of the actual 2022 assessment, or $23.487 million, and then we start taking the deducts. So in this case, we had budgeted around $2.5 million in fiscal '22 to pay off, that would be generated from the TIF. Turns out it's 2.6. But B, that would go to pay off the balance of the debt service owed on IDB. We're keeping that deduct in there to pay ourselves back. But we don't have to pay ourselves back $2.5 million next year because we're going to start right now in fiscal '22.
And I do want to point out, Michael and I have talked about the accounting here in this unwind of the TIF district is we're actually going to be, while the cash at the end, the result is the same, the accounting is different during this period because we're actually reducing that liability to that the general fund, that there's a liability from the industrial board to the general fund. So we're going to be recording $2.3 million to the general fund, but it's not necessarily a revenue. So it's not a revenue such as property taxes, but it is a receivable that we're going to be taking off of the books of the general fund. So it is an accounting exercise that will result in $2.3 million of funds, but it's not a revenue in the traditional sense.
Part of that was because when we first started on this, long before I came on here, we had, the real downturn in the economy back in that time. And so that's the reason the city was having to supplement them or to loan them the money.
Yes, what I referred to the 2015 loan is that was the last loan of that program, but it began as a 2005 loan. And then, of course, 7 and 8, and those would have been periods of building and incremental increases that got delayed. And so that's where there was an agreement that the city general fund would be repaid, and eventually the construction did occur, and that's how we've got to where we just need, and we'll still be through with the TIF program before 2025 that was originally planned back in 2005. So it certainly has been a good story, but we do need one more year to unravel the last of the accounting aspects.
Christine, is it a good question? What was the total amount?
The total amount of
Of the loan?
now the 2015 loan was $12 million,
No, but we're talking about.
and the 2005. I don't know if I can quite. It's
Okay,
probably the neighborhood of
because-
14 to 15 million, but I can certainly find that for you.
Well,
I've been
I'm
living the
just-
2015 loan in my head, and that was a $12 million refinancing of the
the
earlier loan.
So did we pay any, that's, I understand when we did some of the things we've done. We did notes for 15 years and paid nothing but the interest. On the police station, for instance,
Which has been refinanced,
which is a refinance.
and we've
Okay.
began making those payments.
And okay.
Yes, sir. The 2015 loan actually had it had two components to it. The early years were fixed rate, and then the back years were variable rate. And so when the board was able to start prepaying, we started paying off on that back end on the variable rate, and so we went ahead and finished out the fixed rate as we were paying down on the back end, so that we could kind of walk into where we here at Christmas of 2021 paid everything off.
Any other questions or comments? All right, if not, then let's go to the monthly reports. And Margaret, this is your turn.
Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Wilson. I'm the financial manager here at the city. I'm filling in for Mike Lowe today since he took a well-deserved vacation. We're going to start with monthly reports. I just have a few highlights. I know I'm always the last on the agenda. So in monthly reports, as it has been said, we have had 7 consecutive months of over $4 million in local sales tax. October was the 7th month of that. So gasoline tax, you will also see, is 13% higher in October of 21 than it was in October of 20. And then hotel motel tax is up 103% over October of 2020. So in those 3 areas, those are just our highlights to say we are moving in the right direction. Any other questions about your monthly reports in your packets? Okay.
All right, then, Margaret, you're also up for the financial report for the first quarter.
Yes, first quarter, once again, I'm just going to hit some highlights. In the general fund, we are surprisingly able to say we have a $1.4 million surplus for the first quarter. This is due to local sales tax, state sales tax, and some COVID-related grants that we received. Historically, before FY21, we did not have a general fund surplus at the end of the first quarter, since the timing of our major revenues, like sales tax and property taxes, are weighted to the second half of the fiscal year. This first quarter of FY22 is similar to how we started FY21, which also had a surplus at 9/30. Also, you will notice in several funds, the general, sanitation, stormwater, and water and sewer, the salaries and wages are higher than the prior year, and that is due to the COLA and merit adjustments that were received by employees, as well as the one-time premium pay for all employees back in July of 21. And then last but not least, hotel motel collections are 98% higher than this time last year. Once again, everybody's starting to travel a little bit. Everybody's coming back to town. And if you drive through town, you will see the extra traffic.
Turn of traffic.
So you're suggesting we don't drive through town?
I can't get across
Use
town
the
in 10
Mac
minutes anymore, so, like I used to. But any other questions about quarterlies?
Any other questions from anyone on the committee? Any other comments from anyone else? Then, if there's no other business, and I see none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Proper motion is a second. All in favor
Second.
indicate by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.